The blood on Eleanor Vaughn's lips tasted like copper and freedom as she crashed through the underbrush, her bare feet torn and bleeding, her cotton nightgown catching on branches that clawed at her skin like desperate fingers trying to pull her back to the hell she had just escaped. She did not know where she was running, only that the twisted face of Marcus Dalton, the man who had taken her from the stagecoach 3 days ago, was burned into her memory along with the feeling of his flesh between her teeth when she had bitten down hard enough to make him scream and release his grip on her wrist. The night wrapped around her like a shroud, the California wilderness near San Andreas stretching endlessly in every direction. And somewhere behind her she could hear shouting, the sound of men mounting horses, the baying of dogs that would track her scent through the darkness. It was September 1878, and Eleanor was 22 years old, and she would rather die out here in these woods than let them drag her back to that cabin where Dalton had kept her chained like an animal. Her lungs burned as she ran, branches whipping across her face, leaving stinging welts on her cheeks and forehead. She had been traveling from Sacramento to visit her cousin when the stagecoach had been ambushed. The driver and the guard had been shot. The other passengers scattered into the wilderness, but Dalton had grabbed her specifically, had thrown her over his horse and ridden for hours until they reached his isolated cabin deep in the mountains. He had plans for her, he had said, with his tobacco-stained teeth showing in a yellow grin. He was going to make her his wife whether she wanted it or not, and there was nobody out here to stop him. But Eleanor had other plans. She had waited, had pretended to be docile and terrified, had let him think she was broken. And when he had gotten close enough tonight, when he had reached for her with those filthy hands, she had struck like a rattlesnake, her teeth sinking into the soft flesh of his forearm until she tasted blood. His howl of pain and rage still echoed in her ears as she ran. The ground suddenly disappeared beneath her feet, and she tumbled down a steep embankment, rocks and dirt sliding with her, her body slamming against tree roots and stones until she hit the bottom with a jarring impact that knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay there gasping, her ribs screaming in protest, her hands scraped raw. Above her she could hear the dogs getting closer, their barking sharper now, more excited. They had her scent. Eleanor forced herself to her feet, swaying with dizziness and exhaustion. Her nightgown was torn almost to rags, exposing her shoulders and legs to the cold night air. She had no shoes, no coat, no weapon. But she had her will to survive, and that would have to be enough. She stumbled forward into what appeared to be a narrow ravine, the walls rising steep on either side. The moonlight barely penetrated here, and she moved by feel more than sight, her hands outstretched to keep from running into rocks. Behind her, the dogs sounded closer. She could hear men's voices now too, Dalton's rising above the rest, cursing her with words that would make a sailor blush. The ravine opened suddenly into a wider area, and Eleanor saw the dark mouth of what might be a cave or an overhang carved into the rock face. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct, she dove inside, crawling as far back as she could go, making herself small, trying to control her ragged breathing. The space smelled of earth and stone and something else, something that might have been horse. She pressed herself against the back wall of the small cave, her whole body shaking from cold and terror and the aftermath of adrenaline. The dogs were very close now. She could hear their panting, their excited whines. They knew she was near. Then a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, and Eleanor's scream died in her throat as a man's voice whispered urgently in her ear. "Do not make a sound. I am not going to hurt you, but if those men find you here, we are both dead. Do you understand?" Eleanor's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, but something in the man's voice, some quality of calm authority rather than threat, made her nod slightly. The hand over her mouth relaxed, but did not completely release her. "There is a horse behind me," the voice continued, barely audible. "We are in a hollow in the rock that I use sometimes when I am tracking in these mountains. If you stay quiet, they might pass us by. The dogs will smell the horse and me and you all mixed together, and it might confuse them. But you have to trust me and stay absolutely silent." Eleanor nodded again, and the hand finally released her mouth. She turned her head slightly and could make out in the dimness a man's profile, strong-jawed and serious, a hat pulled low over his eyes. Beyond him she could indeed see the shape of a horse, standing calm and still as if it understood the danger. The dogs arrived at the cave entrance in a frenzy of barking and snarling. Eleanor felt every muscle in her body go rigid with fear. The man beside her had not moved, had barely seemed to breathe. His presence was solid and somehow reassuring despite the circumstances. "She went in there," Dalton's voice rang out, harsh and angry. "Get her out." "Hold on, Marcus," another voice, older and more cautious. "That is a bear den. You see the scratch marks on the rocks? You send those dogs in there and they are liable to come back out in pieces. I do not care about the damn dogs. That woman bit me like a rabid animal, and I am going to teach her what happens when you cross Marcus Dalton. You are going to get yourself killed over a woman? There are plenty of women. That cave goes back deep, and if there is a bear in there with cubs, it will tear you apart." There was a long pause. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Beside her, the stranger remained perfectly still. One of the dogs thrust its nose into the cave entrance, snuffling and whining. The man's horse shifted slightly, and suddenly the dog yelped and retreated. The stranger must have done something, made some signal or movement that Eleanor had not detected. "Your dogs are afraid," the cautious voice said. "That tells you something right there. Come on, Marcus. The woman probably kept running. This ravine goes on for another mile. She could be anywhere." More muttering. Dalton's voice raised in protest. Then gradually the sounds faded as the search party moved on. But the stranger beside Eleanor did not move, did not speak, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, when the night had gone silent except for the distant hoot of an owl, he spoke again. "They will circle back. Dalton is not the kind of man to give up easily. We need to move now while we have the chance." "Who are you?" Eleanor's voice came out as a hoarse whisper, her throat raw from running and fear. "My name is Isaac Ortega. I am a tracker, and sometimes I work for the marshal's office in San Andreas. And you are in a considerable amount of trouble, miss." "I did not ask for this," Eleanor said, and was horrified to hear her voice break on the last word. "He took me. He killed people. I just wanted to get away." Isaac was silent for a moment. Then she felt rather than saw him nod. "I believe you, but we need to get you somewhere safe before we sort this out. Can you ride?" "Yes." "Good. My horse can carry us both for a while, but we will have to move carefully. If they hear us, they will come back." Isaac moved to his horse, a tall bay gelding that stood patiently as its master checked the saddle and reins. Eleanor crawled out of her hiding spot, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. When she emerged into the slightly better light of the ravine, Isaac got his first good look at her, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Jesus, what did he do to you?" Eleanor looked down at herself, seeing for the first time the full extent of the damage. Her nightgown hung in tatters, barely covering her. Her feet were bloody, her arms and legs covered in scratches and bruises. She could feel dried blood on her face from where branches had cut her. Without a word, Isaac shrugged out of his long canvas coat and held it out to her. "Put this on. It is not much, but it will keep you warmer and more covered." Eleanor took the coat with trembling hands and wrapped it around herself. It smelled of leather and wood smoke and horses, and it was the most comforting thing she had felt in days. The coat fell almost to her knees, and she pulled it tight around her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "Save your thanks until we are out of these mountains," Isaac said, but his voice was not unkind. "Can you mount up? I will sit behind you so I can guide the horse, and you can lean back if you need to." With Isaac's help, Eleanor managed to get into the saddle. Every part of her body hurt, but the fear of being recaptured drove her forward. Isaac swung up behind her with easy grace, and Eleanor found herself leaning back against a solid chest, strong arms coming around her to hold the reins. It should have frightened her, being this close to a strange man, but somehow it did not. Maybe because he had already had the chance to hurt her and had chosen instead to hide her. "Hold on to the saddle horn," Isaac said quietly. "We are going to move slow and quiet for the first mile. Then we will pick up speed. Try to stay awake if you can." The horse began to move, picking its way carefully through the darkness with the sure-footedness of an animal that knew these trails well. Eleanor gripped the saddle horn and tried to focus on staying conscious, but exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. The warmth of Isaac behind her, the steady rhythm of the horse's movement, the relief of being away from immediate danger, all combined to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. "What is your name?" Isaac's voice cut through the fog in her mind. "Eleanor. Eleanor Vaughn." "Where are you from, Eleanor Vaughn?" "Sacramento. I was traveling to San Andreas to visit my cousin. The stagecoach was attacked 4 days ago, maybe 5. I have lost track." "The Wells Fargo stage that went missing?" Isaac's voice sharpened. "There has been a search party looking for survivors. They found the coach burned and 2 bodies, but no sign of the passengers. There were 4 of us besides the driver and guard. The other passengers ran when the shooting started. I tried to run too, but Dalton caught me. He took me to a cabin in the mountains. He said he was going to marry me." Eleanor's voice broke on the last words. The arms around her tightened fractionally, a gesture of comfort. "You are safe now. I am going to get you to San Andreas, and we are going to report this to the marshal. Dalton is wanted for robbery and murder in 3 counties. This will just add to his list of crimes." They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking up speed as they got further from the ravine. Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, her body finally giving in to the demands of exhaustion. Several times she felt herself starting to slide from the saddle, and each time Isaac's arm tightened around her waist, holding her secure. When she woke fully, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She was still on the horse, still wrapped in Isaac's coat, but they had stopped in a small clearing beside a stream. Isaac had dismounted and was standing a few feet away, scanning the trail behind them. "Are they following us?" Eleanor asked, her voice thick with sleep. Isaac turned to look at her, and in the morning light she got her first clear view of him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell almost to his shoulders and sharp, intelligent brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, and there was a jagged scar along his left jawline that gave him a dangerous look despite the gentleness of his manner toward her. He was tall and lean, with the build of someone who spent their life in the saddle. "Not yet," he said, "but they will eventually pick up our trail. We need to keep moving, but I thought you could use some water and a few minutes to rest." Eleanor slid down from the horse, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. Isaac was there in an instant, his hand under her elbow steadying her. "Easy. Your feet are in bad shape. Here, sit on this rock and let me see." Too tired to argue, Eleanor sat where he indicated. Isaac knelt in front of her and gently lifted one of her feet, examining the damage. His touch was careful and professional, but Eleanor still flinched. She had not been treated gently by a man in days. "I need to wrap these," Isaac said. "If I do not, they will get infected, and you will not be able to walk at all." He pulled a clean cloth from his saddlebag and used his knife to cut it into strips. Then he took a canteen and poured water over Eleanor's feet, washing away the dirt and blood. She hissed at the sting, but did not pull away. "You have done this before," she observed, watching him work. "I have been tracking in these mountains since I was 15. You learn to patch up injuries, or you do not survive." His hands moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping her feet firmly but not too tight. "This will have to do until we can get you to a proper doctor in San Andreas." "How far is it?" "If we push hard and do not run into trouble, we can be there by nightfall. But you need to eat something first, and so does the horse." Isaac pulled out a small bundle from his saddlebag and unwrapped it to reveal some jerky and hardtack. "It is not much, but it will keep you going." Eleanor took the food gratefully. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. Dalton had given her scraps, barely enough to keep her alive. As she chewed the tough jerky, she watched Isaac as he tended to his horse, checking its hooves, giving it water from his hat, speaking to it in low, soothing tones. There was a competence to everything he did, a quiet confidence that made her feel safer than she had in a very long time. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. Isaac looked up from checking the horse's hooves. "Why would I not?" "You did not know me. You could have stayed hidden and let them pass. Instead, you risked your life." He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face. "I heard you running through the brush like a frightened deer. I heard those men hunting you like you were an animal. No woman deserves that. No person deserves that." He paused, then added, "My mother was Apache. She taught me that there is no honor in standing by while someone suffers if you have the power to help." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes at his words, the simple decency of them. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." "You would have kept fighting," Isaac said with certainty. "You bit your captor hard enough to escape, and you ran through the wilderness in bare feet rather than surrender. You are stronger than you think. Eleanor Vaughn." Those words wrapped around Eleanor's heart and settled there, a warmth spreading through her chest. She finished the food in silence, and then they were mounting up again, Isaac's arms coming around her as he took the reins. This time she did not hesitate to lean back against him, and she felt his slight exhalation of breath as she did so, as if he had been holding himself tense and had finally allowed himself to relax. The sun climbed higher as they rode, and the temperature rose with it. California in September could be brutally hot, and Eleanor was grateful for the shade of the trees as they followed narrow mountain trails that seemed known only to Isaac and his horse. Several times he stopped, dismounted, and studied the ground, looking for signs of pursuit. Each time he remounted with a grim expression that told Eleanor they were still being followed, even if the distance between them and Dalton's men remained significant. "Tell me about yourself," Isaac said as they rode through a particularly dense stretch of pine forest. "It will help pass the time and keep you alert." Eleanor considered what to say. "There is not much to tell. I am 22 years old. My parents died of fever when I was 18, and I have been living with my aunt and uncle in Sacramento. I work as a seamstress. I was coming to San Andreas to visit my cousin Margaret because she just had a baby and wanted help. That is all. My life has been quite ordinary until this week." "Ordinary is underrated," Isaac said. "I would wager you will appreciate ordinary very much when you get back to it. What about you? You said your mother was Apache. Is that why you know these mountains so well?" "Part of it. My father was a Mexican vaquero who worked on one of the big ranches near Los Angeles. He met my mother when she was living with a mission community, trying to adapt to the white man's world after her tribe had been scattered. They fell in love and married, but it was not an easy life for them. People did not approve of the match. When I was young, we moved around a lot, never quite belonging anywhere. My father taught me to ride and work cattle. My mother taught me to track and read signs and survive in the wilderness. When I was 15, they both died in a cholera outbreak, and I have been on my own since then." "I am sorry," Eleanor said quietly. "That must have been very difficult." "It was a long time ago. I learned to survive, and eventually I learned to do more than survive. The marshal's office started hiring me to track criminals through terrain where most pauses would get lost. It pays well and I am good at it." He paused, then added, "Though I was not expecting to find a woman hiding in my emergency shelter when I was tracking a group of cattle rustlers through these mountains." "I am glad you did," Eleanor said, and meant it with her whole heart. They rode on through the afternoon, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from streams they crossed. Isaac kept up a steady commentary as they traveled, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the mountains, clearly trying to keep Eleanor's spirits up and her mind off the men who were hunting her. She found herself fascinated by him, by the way he moved so easily through this wild landscape, by the gentle way he spoke to his horse, by the careful courtesy he showed her despite the desperate circumstances. When the sun was beginning to slant toward the western horizon, Isaac suddenly tensed behind her. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered. "We have company. Someone is on the trail ahead of us." His hand moved to the rifle secured to his saddle. "Stay quiet." The horse picked its way around a bend in the trail, and suddenly they were facing 3 mounted men. Eleanor's heart lurched with terror before she realized these were not Dalton's men. They wore badges pinned to their shirts and had the weathered, hard look of lawmen who had seen too much. "Isaac Ortega," one of them said, a man with a thick gray mustache and shrewd blue eyes. "We have been looking for you, got word there was trouble in these mountains." "Marshal Brennan," Isaac said, and Eleanor could hear the relief in his voice. "This is Eleanor Vaughn. She is a survivor from the Wells Fargo stage that went missing. She was taken by Marcus Dalton and held captive. She escaped last night, and I found her being hunted. Dalton and at least 3 other men are somewhere behind us." Marshal Brennan's eyes moved to Eleanor, and his expression shifted from professional interest to concern. "Miss Vaughn, you are safe now. We are going to get you back to San Andreas and get you medical attention." He turned to one of his deputies. "Ride ahead and let Doc Harrison know we are bringing in an injured woman. Tell him to prepare a room at the boarding house, too." The deputy wheeled his horse and took off at a gallop. Marshal Brennan moved his horse closer and studied the trail behind them. "How many men does Dalton have with him?" "At least 3, maybe 4. They have dogs. They will not give up easily. Dalton is not going to let a witness get away. Then we will make sure he does not have a choice. Come on, let us get Miss Vaughn to town, and then we will organize a proper posse. Dalton has been a thorn in our side for too long. It is time to bring him in." The journey to San Andreas took another 2 hours, but with the marshal and his deputy flanking them, Eleanor finally allowed herself to believe she might actually be safe. The town appeared as the last light was fading from the sky. A collection of wooden buildings sprawled along the main street, lanterns beginning to glow in windows, the sound of a piano drifting from a saloon. Isaac rode straight to a neat white house with a sign that read, "Dr. William Harrison, Physician and Surgeon." The doctor himself came out before they had even dismounted, a tall man with kind eyes and gray hair. "Bring her inside," he said immediately upon seeing Eleanor. "Isaac, help her down carefully." Isaac dismounted first, then reached up for Eleanor. She slid into his arms, and for a moment he held her, looking down into her face with an expression she could not quite read. "You're going to be fine now," he said softly. "Doc Harrison is the best there is. Will you stay?" The words came out before Eleanor could stop them, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment. But Isaac's expression softened. "I will be right outside. I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Harrison led Eleanor inside to an examination room and helped her onto the table. A woman appeared, older and motherly, who introduced herself as Mrs. Harrison, the doctor's wife. Between the two of them, they examined Eleanor's injuries with gentle, practiced hands. They cleaned and bandaged her feet, applied salve to the cuts and scratches that covered her arms and legs, checked her ribs where she had fallen down the embankment. "Nothing broken," Dr. Harrison said finally, "but you are severely exhausted and malnourished. You need rest and good food and time to heal. My wife has prepared a room for you at the boarding house. It is quiet and safe, and the proprietor, Mrs. Chen, is very discreet. You will be comfortable there." "I do not have any money," Eleanor said, the reality of her situation suddenly crashing down on her. "Everything was in my trunk on the stagecoach. I have nothing." "Do not worry about that now," Mrs. Harrison said firmly. "The important thing is getting you well. We will sort out the details later." They gave her a clean dress to wear, simple calico that belonged to Mrs. Harrison but fit well enough, and a pair of soft shoes. When Eleanor emerged from the examination room, she found Isaac waiting exactly where he had said he would be, standing in the front room of the doctor's house, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the door. When he saw her, his whole face changed, relief washing over his features. "You look better," he said. "I feel better. Dr. Harrison says I will heal." Eleanor hesitated, then said, The marshal wants to organize a posse. Will you be going with them? Something flickered in Isaac's eyes. Yes, I am the best tracker they have, and Dalton knows these mountains, but I will make sure you are settled first. They walked together through the darkening streets to the boarding house, a 2-story building with flower boxes in the windows and a welcoming porch. Mrs. Chen, a small Chinese woman with a warm smile, showed Eleanor to a room on the second floor. It was simple but clean, with a bed covered in a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and curtains that moved gently in the evening breeze from the open window. You rest now, Mrs. Chen said in careful English. I bring food soon. When she left, Eleanor found herself alone with Isaac for the first time since they had arrived in town. He stood in the doorway, seemingly reluctant to leave. I need to go meet with the marshal, he said, but I wanted to make sure you were settled. Isaac? Eleanor took a step toward him. Please be careful. Dalton is dangerous. I know. But he cannot be allowed to keep doing this. If we do not stop him now, he will hurt someone else. Isaac reached out and very gently touched Eleanor's cheek with his fingertips. The gesture was brief but intimate, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. I will come back. I promise you that. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs as he left. Eleanor sat down on the bed, her whole body shaking with reaction. Mrs. Chen brought food as promised, a bowl of hearty stew and fresh bread, and Eleanor ate every bite despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Then she lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and let exhaustion pull her under. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of horses and men's voices in the street below. Creeping to the window, she looked out and saw Marshal Brennan and at least a dozen men, all armed, preparing to ride out. Isaac was among them, checking his rifle and speaking in low tones with the marshal. As if he felt her watching, he looked up suddenly, and their eyes met across the distance. He raised his hand in a small salute, and then the posse was moving out, disappearing into the darkness. Eleanor did not sleep again that night. She sat by the window, watching the eastern sky slowly lighten, and prayed to whatever gods might be listening to bring Isaac back safely. The next day passed in an agony of waiting. Mrs. Chen brought her breakfast and lunch, both of which Eleanor picked at without appetite. Several townspeople came by, curious and kind, bringing clothes and supplies. Her cousin Margaret arrived in the afternoon, weeping and exclaiming and embracing Eleanor so hard it hurt her bruised ribs. We thought you were dead, Margaret sobbed, when they found the stagecoach and said there were no survivors. I thought I had lost you. Eleanor comforted her cousin as best she could, but her attention kept drifting to the window, looking for signs of the posse's return. It was not until late afternoon, as the shadows were lengthening, that the thunder of hooves announced their arrival. Eleanor was down the stairs and out the door before Mrs. Chen could stop her, her bandaged feet forgotten as she ran into the street. The posse was riding in, some of the men wounded, all of them looking exhausted. And in the middle of them, hands bound and face twisted with rage, was Marcus Dalton. Eleanor stopped in the middle of the street, her whole body going cold. Dalton saw her and lunged forward, only to be yanked back by the rope securing him. You, he snarled, you are going to pay for what you did to me. You think you are safe? You think a rope and a jail cell will stop me? I am going to get out, and when I do, I am coming for you. That is enough. Isaac's voice cut through Dalton's threats like a knife. He rode forward, positioning his horse between Dalton and Eleanor, blocking her from view. You are going to hang Dalton. You are wanted for murder in 3 counties. Your threatening an innocent woman just adds to the list of reasons why no jury will spare you. Marshal Brennan and his deputies hauled Dalton away toward the jail, still cursing and threatening. The rest of the posse dispersed, heading to their homes or the saloon. Isaac dismounted stiffly, and Eleanor saw for the first time the crude bandage wrapped around his upper arm, blood seeping through the cloth. You are hurt, she said, moving toward him. It is nothing, just a graze. But she could see the pain in his eyes, the way he held himself carefully, Come with me. Dr. Harrison needs to look at that. Isaac did not argue, and Eleanor took that as a sign of how much pain he was actually in. She took his horse's reins and led them both back to Dr. Harrison's house. The doctor took one look at Isaac's arm and immediately ushered him into the examination room. Eleanor waited outside, pacing, her heart racing. Mrs. Harrison brought her tea and tried to convince her to sit down, but Eleanor could not be still. When Dr. Harrison finally emerged, he looked tired but satisfied. The bullet went clean through. No major damage. I stitched it up and gave him some laudanum for the pain. He is going to be fine, but he needs to rest for a few days and let that arm heal. Can I see him? Dr. Harrison smiled. He has been asking for you. Go ahead. Isaac was sitting on the examination table, his shirt off, his arm wrapped in fresh white bandages. When Eleanor entered, his eyes locked on her immediately. Are you all right? He asked, which was such a ridiculous question given that he was the one who had been shot that Eleanor almost laughed. I am fine. You are the one who got hurt. Dalton saw me coming and took a shot. His aim was not very good. Isaac winced as he tried to move his arm. Doc says I need to rest for a few days. I am not very good at resting. Then you will have to learn. Eleanor moved closer, looking at the bandage. Is there anyone I should notify? Family or friends who will be worried about you? No, there is no one. Isaac's voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor heard the loneliness underneath it. Then I will make sure you follow the doctor's orders, she said firmly. It is the least I can do after you saved my life. Isaac looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made Eleanor's breath catch. Eleanor, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. When I was out there tracking Dalton, when the shooting started and I realized I might not make it back, all I could think about was you. About making sure you were safe. About wanting to see you again. He paused, then added, I know we have only known each other for a day. I know this is not the time or the place, but I need you to know that. Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. I was so afraid, she whispered. I sat by the window all night watching for you to come back. I barely know you, Isaac Ortega, but the thought of something happening to you was unbearable. Isaac reached out with his good hand, and Eleanor took it, their fingers intertwining. Stay in San Andreas, he said, at least for a while. Let yourself heal, and let me get to know you properly when we are not running for our lives. I will stay, Eleanor said, for as long as you want me to. The next few weeks unfolded with a strange, sweet domesticity that Eleanor had never experienced before. Isaac stayed at the boarding house to recover, taking a room down the hall from Eleanor's. Mrs. Chen fussed over both of them, bringing hearty meals and herbal teas and making sure Isaac did not try to do too much too soon. Eleanor spent her days helping Mrs. Chen around the boarding house, using her seamstress skills to mend linens and make curtains. She also spent time with her cousin Margaret and the new baby, letting the simple joy of holding a newborn remind her that there was still goodness and innocence in the world. But her favorite times were the evenings, when she and Isaac would sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk as the sun set and the stars came out. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. Isaac told her about growing up caught between two worlds, never quite fitting in anywhere. Eleanor told him about the loneliness of losing her parents young, of feeling like she was always on the outside of life, watching it happen to other people. You are not on the outside anymore, Isaac said one evening, his dark eyes serious in the lamplight. You are right here, in the middle of your own life. You survived something terrible and you are still standing. That takes more courage than you know. I only survived because you helped me, Eleanor said softly. We helped each other. You would have kept fighting even if I had not been there, but I'm very glad I was. As the days passed, Isaac's arm healed and his strength returned. Marshal Brennan came by regularly to update them on Dalton's case. The outlaw was being held in the county jail awaiting trial. 3 different counties were filing charges, and the evidence was overwhelming. It was only a matter of time before he faced the gallows. He is still making threats about you, Miss Vaughn, the marshal said apologetically. But he is not going anywhere. We have guards on him day and night. Despite the marshal's assurances, Eleanor could not shake a vague sense of unease. She found herself looking over her shoulder when she walked through town, jumping at sudden noises. Isaac noticed her nervousness and started accompanying her whenever she went out, his presence a quiet comfort. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival in San Andreas, Isaac asked Eleanor to take a walk with him. They strolled through the town and out onto the edge of the wilderness, where the land opened up into rolling hills covered in golden grass. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "There is something I need to ask you," Isaac said, stopping at the top of a hill with a view of the mountains in the distance. "Eleanor, what are your plans? Are you going to go back to Sacramento?" Eleanor had been dreading this question. "I do not know. My cousin wants me to stay with her and her husband. They have a small farm outside of town and they could use the help, but I do not want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden." Isaac took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "But that is not what I'm really asking. What I want to know is, could you see yourself staying here? Not just for your cousin, but for yourself? For us?" Eleanor's heart began to race. "Isaac, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I am in love with you." The words came out firm and clear with no hesitation. "I know it has only been 3 weeks. I know people will say it is too soon, that we do not know each other well enough, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found the place where I belong. You are my home, Eleanor Vaughn." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you put your coat around me and promised to keep me safe. You have been keeping that promise every day since." Isaac cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "Then stay? Build a life here with me? I do not have much to offer you. I am just a tracker who lives out of a saddlebag most of the time. But I swear to you, Eleanor, I will spend every day of my life making you happy and keeping you safe." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "yes, I will stay. I will build a life with you." Isaac leaned down and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Eleanor felt something inside her that had been broken begin to heal. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably do this properly," Isaac said. "I should ask your family for permission to court you. I should save up money for a ring. We should have a proper engagement." "We should," Eleanor agreed, "but I do not care about any of that. I just want to be with you." "Then you shall be, for as long as you will have me." They walked back to town hand in hand as the stars came out, planning their future together. Isaac talked about building a house on a piece of land he had been eyeing outside of town, a place with good water and shelter from the wind. Eleanor talked about starting a dressmaking business using the skills she had developed in Sacramento. They would build their life together step by step, day by day. But their happiness was shattered 2 days later when Marshal Brennan arrived at the boarding house with grim news. "Dalton escaped," he said without preamble. "Last night, he had help from the outside. One of his gang members overpowered the guard and broke him out. They killed a deputy in the process. We tracked them heading north into the mountains." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Isaac's hand found hers and gripped tight. "He is coming for her," Isaac said flatly. "He said he would." "We do not know that," Marshal Brennan said, but he did not sound convinced. He might just be trying to get out of the territory. "He is coming for her," Isaac repeated. "I know men like Dalton. He sees this as a personal insult. He will not rest until he has his revenge." "Then we will be ready for him." The marshal looked at Eleanor. "Miss Vaughn, I am going to post guards at the boarding house. You are not to go anywhere without an escort. And Isaac, I know you are not officially a deputy, but I could use your help tracking Dalton down before he gets to her." "I am not leaving her," Isaac said immediately. "If Dalton is coming here, then this is where I need to be." They argued about it for an hour, but Isaac would not be moved. In the end, Marshal Brennan agreed to let Isaac stay as Eleanor's personal guard while the rest of the posse continued tracking Dalton through the mountains. The next 3 days were tense and frightening. Isaac barely left Eleanor's side, and when he did, one of the marshal's deputies took his place. Eleanor tried to go about her normal routine, helping Mrs. Chen, working on her sewing, but the weight of constant fear was exhausting. On the third night, Isaac insisted that Eleanor try to get some rest. "You are wearing yourself out," he said gently. "I will be right outside your door. Nothing is going to happen to you." Eleanor reluctantly agreed and went to her room, but sleep eluded her. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and whisper of the old building. Outside her window, she could hear the sounds of the town settling down for the night. The piano from the saloon falling silent, the last voices fading away. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke suddenly to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and saw a dark figure climbing through her window. Eleanor opened her mouth to scream, but the figure lunged forward, a hand clamping over her mouth. She smelled tobacco and sweat and knew with sick certainty that it was Dalton. "Hello, sweetheart," he hissed. "Did you miss me?" Eleanor did the only thing she could think of. She bit down on his hand again, just as hard as she had the first time. Dalton howled and jerked back, and Eleanor scrambled out of bed and ran for the door. She yanked it open and practically fell into Isaac's arms. He had clearly been asleep in the chair outside her door, but he was awake instantly, his eyes taking in the situation with sharp clarity. "Stay behind me," he ordered, pushing Eleanor back as Dalton came charging out of the room, a knife in his hand. What happened next seemed to take place in slow motion and at lightning speed simultaneously. Dalton lunged at Isaac with the knife. Isaac sidestepped, his injured arm hampering him slightly, and grabbed Dalton's wrist. The two men crashed into the wall, grappling for control of the weapon. Eleanor screamed for help, and doors began opening up and down the hallway. Dalton was larger and heavier than Isaac, but Isaac was faster and fighting with the desperation of a man protecting the woman he loved. He twisted Dalton's wrist and the knife clattered to the floor. Dalton threw a wild punch that connected with Isaac's injured arm, and Isaac grunted in pain but did not release his grip. Then Marshal Brennan and 2 deputies were thundering up the stairs, guns drawn. The marshal did not hesitate. He brought the butt of his gun down on the back of Dalton's head, and the outlaw collapsed. "Get him in irons this time, Dree," the marshal snapped at his deputies. "And for God's sake, make sure he does not wake up until we have him in a cell with triple guards." Isaac swayed on his feet, and Eleanor was there, her arms around him, holding him steady. Blood was seeping through the bandage on his arm where the stitches had likely torn. "You are hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "I am fine. Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "No. You stopped him." Eleanor was crying now, great shaking sobs of relief and reaction. "You saved me again." "Always," Isaac said, pulling her close with his good arm. "I will always protect you." Dr. Harrison was summoned, and he re-stitched Isaac's arm with a disapproving look. "You are going to have quite a scar," he said, "and you need to stop tearing these stitches. Your arm needs time to heal properly." "It will heal," Isaac said, his eyes on Eleanor. "I have all the time in the world now." This time, when Dalton was taken to jail, he was held in chains in a cell with armed guards posted around the clock. The trial was moved up and held within a week. Eleanor had to testify, recounting the horror of her captivity and escape. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, but Isaac sat in the courtroom every day, his steady presence giving her strength. The jury took less than an hour to return a verdict of guilty on all charges. Dalton was sentenced to hang, and this time the sentence was carried out immediately before he could escape again. Eleanor did not attend the execution, but Isaac did, standing witness to make sure that the man who had terrorized her could never hurt anyone again. When it was finally over, when Dalton was truly and permanently gone, Eleanor felt something release inside her chest, a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. "It is over," Isaac said that evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house. He cannot hurt you anymore. I know, and I finally feel like I can breathe again. Eleanor leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder. I want to move forward now. I want to start our life together. Then let us do that. Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Eleanor saw a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. I bought this last week before Dalton escaped. I was waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I think this is that moment. He slid off the porch and got down on one knee, ignoring his injured arm. Eleanor Vaughn, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and building a future with you? Yes, Eleanor said through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger and then pulled her down into his arms, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Chen was standing in the doorway, grinning from ear to ear. About time, she said. Now come inside. I make special dinner to celebrate. They were married a month later in the small church in San Andreas, with Eleanor's cousin and her family in attendance, and half the town turning out to wish them well. Eleanor wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac wore a new suit that looked uncomfortable on him, but he bore it with good grace. Marshal Brennan gave Eleanor away, and Dr. and Mrs. Harrison stood as witnesses. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed Eleanor with such joy that the whole church erupted in applause. They moved into the house that Isaac built on that piece of land outside of town, a sturdy cabin with a front porch that looked out over the mountains. Eleanor set up her dressmaking business in the spare room, and within months she had more orders than she could fill. Isaac continued to work as a tracker for the marshal's office, but he never took jobs that would keep him away from home for more than a few days. Their life was simple but full. They worked hard during the day, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about their day, making plans for the future. Isaac taught Eleanor to ride, and they would take long trips into the mountains together, Isaac showing her the hidden places he loved, the secret valleys and clear streams that few people knew about. A year after their wedding, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. Isaac was beside himself with joy and immediately became overprotective, insisting that she stop taking orders for dresses and let him do all the heavy work around the house. Eleanor tolerated this for about a week before she put her foot down. I am pregnant, not an invalid, she said firmly. I can still work, and I can certainly still lift a basket of laundry. Stop hovering. But his concern was endearing, and Eleanor loved him all the more for it. As her belly grew round with their child, Isaac would sit for hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, talking to it in a mixture of English and Spanish and what Eleanor suspected was Apache, telling their child stories about its grandparents and the wild places of California. Their son was born in the spring of 1880, with Dr. Harrison in attendance and Mrs. Harrison helping with the delivery. Isaac paced outside like a caged animal until Mrs. Harrison finally took pity on him and let him into the room. He was there to hear his son's first cry, to see Eleanor holding their baby with tears of joy streaming down her face. What should we name him? Eleanor asked, looking down at the tiny, perfect face of their child. I was thinking we could name him James, Isaac said softly, after my father, but you should choose his middle name. James William, Eleanor said, glancing at Dr. Harrison, who had delivered their son safely. James William Ortega. Isaac kissed her forehead and then kissed his son's tiny hand. Welcome to the world, James. You have no idea how much you are already loved. Parenthood transformed them both. Isaac, who had been alone for so much of his life, threw himself into fatherhood with fierce devotion. He built a cradle for James with his own hands, carving animals into the headboard. He walked the floor with the baby when he cried at night, singing old Spanish lullabies that his father had sung to him. Eleanor watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. She had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could be this full and rich and beautiful. The nightmares about Dalton and her captivity grew less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. She was healing, inside and out. 2 years later, they had a daughter whom they named Sarah Rose. She had Eleanor's green eyes and Isaac's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Isaac taught both his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk, taking them on gentle trails through the mountains, showing them the land he loved. Eleanor's dressmaking business flourished, and Isaac's reputation as a tracker brought in steady work. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Their home was filled with love and laughter, with friends and family visiting regularly. Margaret and her family became regular fixtures at their table, and Eleanor loved watching her children play with their cousins. Dr. and Mrs. Harrison became like surrogate grandparents, showering James and Sarah with affection and gifts. Even Marshall Brennan, who had never married, became an honorary uncle, teaching James to whittle and telling Sarah stories about the old days that made her eyes grow wide. As the years passed, Isaac and Eleanor built not just a life, but a legacy. They were known throughout San Andreas as a couple who had overcome terrible adversity to find happiness together. Their story, whispered and embellished over time, became a kind of legend in the area. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Eleanor back to that hill where he had first told her he loved her. The children were staying with Margaret for the night, giving them a rare evening alone. They sat together watching the sunset, just as they had a decade earlier, Isaac's arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Do you remember what I said to you here?" Isaac asked. "You said I was your home," Eleanor replied, "that when you were with me, you felt like you had finally found where you belonged." "It is still true, more true now than it was then." Isaac turned to look at her, his dark eyes warm with love. "You saved me, Eleanor, just as much as I saved you. Before I met you, I was just drifting through life, never really connecting with anyone or anything. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me a reason to come home every night." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together." "The most beautiful thing," Isaac agreed. He pulled her close and kissed her as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They stayed there on the hill until the stars came out, talking and remembering, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. When they finally rode back to their home, the lights were glowing in the windows, welcoming them back. As the years continued to unfold, Isaac and Eleanor watched their children grow into young adults. James inherited his father's tracking skills and his mother's compassion, eventually following in Isaac's footsteps as a tracker for the marshal's office. Sarah had her mother's talent with needle and thread and her father's love of the land, and she opened her own dressmaking shop in town while also breeding horses on the family property. By the time Isaac and Eleanor reached their 50s, they had 4 grandchildren and another on the way. Their house, which had started as a simple cabin, had grown over the years with additions and improvements, but they still spent their evenings on that original front porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Do you ever think about that night?" Eleanor asked one evening. "The night you found me hiding in that cave?" "Sometimes," Isaac admitted, "but not the way you might think. I do not think about the fear or the danger. I think about how, in that moment, my whole life changed. I think about how one decision, one choice to help someone in need brought me everything I could have ever wanted." Eleanor reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, the way they had 10,000 times before. "I think about it too, about how close I came to not making it, about how lucky I was that you were there, in that exact place at that exact time." "Not luck," Isaac said firmly. "Fate. Destiny. Whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other. I truly believe that." "So do I," Eleanor said softly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. James and his wife lived nearby with their 3 children, and they visited often. Sarah and her husband had built a house on the adjacent property, and their daughter was due any day now. "We built a good life," Isaac said, his voice full of satisfaction. "A really good life." "The best life," Eleanor agreed. As the sun set and the first stars appeared, Isaac and Eleanor stood and walked inside together, their hands still clasped. They had survived kidnapping and violence, fear and danger. They had built a home and a family from nothing. They had loved each other through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, and they would continue to love each other for all the days they had left, grateful for the night that brought them together and the life they had built from that single moment of courage and compassion. Their love story had started in darkness and desperation, but it had become something bright and beautiful and enduring. It was a testament to the power of hope, the strength of the human spirit, and the transforming nature of love. Years later, when Isaac was in his 70s and Eleanor was 71, they would still take walks together through the land they loved. Isaac moved slower now, his hair completely silver, but his eyes still shone with love when he looked at his wife. Eleanor's hands were gnarled with arthritis, making sewing difficult, but her heart was still young when Isaac took her in his arms. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their great-grandchildren play, Isaac pulled Eleanor close. "Do you know what my favorite moment is?" he asked. "Tell me," Eleanor said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "This one. Right now, every moment I have with you is my favorite." Eleanor smiled, that same smile that had captivated Isaac from the first time he truly saw her. "Mine too." They lived long, full lives, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. When Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Eleanor held his hand and whispered the words she had told him every day for 50 years. "I love you, forever and always." She followed him 2 years later, her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were about Isaac, about the cowboy who had found her hiding in a cave and kept her safe, who had given her a life beyond anything she could have imagined. They were buried side by side on the hill where Isaac had proposed, overlooking the mountains they both loved. Their children made sure that their headstone told their story simply but completely. Isaac Ortega and Eleanor Ortega, united by fate, bound by love, together forever. And on warm summer evenings when the light slants gold across the California hills and the wind whispers through the grass, locals will tell you that if you visit that hill at sunset, you can sometimes see two figures standing there, hand in hand, looking out over the land they loved. The cowboy and the woman he saved, still together, still in love. Their story a reminder that even in the darkest nights hope can be found, and that true love, once found, never truly ends. Their descendants still live in San Andreas, carrying on the legacy of courage and compassion that Isaac and Eleanor established. The house they built still stands, lovingly maintained by their family, a testament to what can be built when two people commit to loving each other through everything life brings. The story of the woman who bit her captor and ran into the night, and the cowboy who found her hiding and kept her safe, became more than just a story. It became a legacy passed down through generations, a reminder that love can bloom even in the darkest circumstances, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best parts of our future. Isaac and Eleanor's love story proved that heroism comes in many forms, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to love and be loved, to build rather than destroy, to create light in the darkness. They took the worst night of Eleanor's life and transformed it into the beginning of something beautiful. They took fear and pain and turned it into hope and joy. And that, more than anything, is what made their story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years. Not just because it was dramatic or romantic, though it was both of those things, but because it was true. Because it reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how dark the night, dawn will always come. No matter how lost you feel, someone might be out there ready to help you find your way. And no matter how broken you think you are, the right person can help you heal. Isaac and Eleanor Ortega lived their truth every single day of their lives together, proving that love, real and true and deep, can conquer anything. Their story began with violence and fear, but it ended with peace and joy and a family that stretched across generations. They proved that the end of one story can be the beginning of something even better, and that sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you can lead directly to the best thing that ever happens to you. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the town of San Andreas itself, in the way people treated each other with kindness and compassion, in the way they looked out for those in need, in the way they believed that love was worth fighting for. Isaac and Eleanor had shown them all what was possible when two people truly committed to loving each other and building a life together. And so their story ends not with sadness, but with celebration. A celebration of a life well lived, of love well earned, of a family well raised. A celebration of two people who found each other in the darkness and created their own light. A celebration of the cowboy who kept his promise to keep Eleanor safe, and the woman who gave him a home and a purpose and a love that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Their story ends, but their love never did. It continues in every sunset over those California hills, in every act of kindness in San Andreas, in every descendant who carries their names and their values. Isaac and Eleanor Ortega found each other on the worst night of Eleanor's life, and they turned it into the beginning of the best life either of them could have imagined. And that is exactly how a love story should end. Not with an ending at all, but with a legacy that goes on forever. Proof that love, real love, never truly dies. It simply transforms, spreading out like ripples on a pond, touching more lives than the original lovers could ever have imagined. Isaac found Eleanor hiding in a cave, frightened and hurt and running for her life. He kept her safe, just as he promised, and she gave him everything he had been searching for his entire life: a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that would echo through the generations. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their love eternal, and in the end that was all that mattered.